the communication breaks down, and the last thing that you're left with in that element of that relationship is trust. If the trust falls through at that point, the relationship is dissolved. Win the night.
Or something like that.
Or something like it.
Testing 1, 2.
You're really testing me right now.
Are you ready for that test?
What's the test? Test.
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 First of all,
yes.
we got to talk about the last 24 hours is what we have to talk about.
Oh, the last 24 hours? The last 24 hours is pretty legit. We got to see some old buddies.
Yeah. I was not expecting to see everybody. I think actually when we were supposed to get together, I was just under the impression that you and I were hanging out, and I was like, if we have anybody else, bonus. But I thought we were going to go to Topgolf, right?
Yeah.
First of all, let's go back a little bit further than that.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, I reached out to you. I was like, hey, I'm setting up an event, and I'm not going to get into too much detail because that's going to be in the future. You guys are going to see that in the future. So we're not going to let anything out of the hat right now. Yeah. But there's an event coming up, and I was like, hey, be cool if you can make it. And you're like, hey, let's get together in 24 hours, as soon as possible.
Just so happened to be in the area when you sent me that text.
Yeah, because normally you work all over Wisconsin, right? Or all over the country.
States, yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about that? What do you build cryotherapy chambers, right?
Yeah. Cryotherapy chambers. So these things are pretty cool, pun intended.
Yeah.
They get to 160, 170 degrees below zero.
Yeah.
But it's all thermodynamics, so they operate on kind of the same principle as like a polar plunge or cold plunge, minus the wetness.
Yeah.
So especially in a commercial environment, you're like you have sanitary issues for that, but the electronic cryotherapy is a much slower thermal draw than a polar plunge or ice bath, so you don't get the vasoconstriction that you get from an ice bath with electronic cryotherapy.
That stuff has to be kind of dangerous, doesn't it?
I mean, some of the equipment and refrigerants that we're working with can be dangerous, but we operate pretty safely. So now with the chamber itself, there's definitely safety parameters that are put in place for that. If no one clears the session on the exterior of the chamber, after 3.5 minutes, it'll immediately go into safety mode and start warming up the inside of the chamber. So one of the things that how long have you been doing that, first of all? Well, I worked for Restore Hyper Wellness for just over a year, and then it got to be too much. There'd be weeks I'd be putting in 80 hours.
Especially going all over, because in general, you've been a mobile let's say technician, just for the sake of it, because you used to do tiles and you used to do a bunch of different stuff, huh?
Yeah, I worked for a company setting up their innovation workshops all over the United States for 2.5 years, and that was every Monday and Friday I was on a plane, so that's definitely a unique lifestyle. One
thing that I wanted to get into as well is, first of all, for people who don't know you, why don't you introduce yourself? However you want to introduce yourself.
I don't know. Where do I begin? I guess I don't really like to talk too much about myself, but I guess I grew up on a farm in Southwest Wisconsin. I was born and raised there, and then after graduating high school, went on to college for a couple years before joining the Marine Corps. Did that off and on. I had little breaks in service, but still remained on contract. And that was enjoyable, and the experiences certainly vary in that. And I was pretty fortunate to have the experiences that I did and meet the people I met. So.
And for those that might be wondering, and you'll probably see a common theme with the other episodes, is it just seems like I talk to a lot of Marines, don't I? It's just the most amount of people I've been around in my entire life has been Marines. It's just part of my existence is at some point or another I talk to Marines, and so. I know him as a Sergeant Schmidt, and that's always been my way of recognizing him. And so it's interesting now that I'm out, right? And we kind of we've hung out a little bit here and there, but my plan has always been to try to know the person. You know, in the Marine Corps, we talk a lot about talking to the rank and not the person, right? So, like, let's say you don't like a person, you respect the rank, and you know, you address them as the rank, and don't worry about the person. That's for some another time. You know, you don't worry about that while you're in uniform. And so now that we're out, right, there isn't that lesson of, okay, how do you get to know the person now, because we're not in uniform anymore,
right?
And so we're focusing on that, and so that's what I'm trying to focus on. And so it's great to see this more personable side of you, where it's like we're in uniform, and so we have to be a little bit more professional, more buttoned up. And so let's just let everybody know how the last 24 hours have been. Like we got together, we had a whole group of not a whole group, a nice little group of former leaders in the Marine Corps of mine, and then we all chatted about life, like how's life going. There was no rank in that conversation whatsoever. We just talked about how we're doing, and we got to know the people, right? And you already know them fairly well. You've spent a lot of time, but me, I came in right on the latter end, because you had left for a short while and then came back. And so I came in right on the tail end of that, of when everybody was rising through the ranks that you're friends with. Yep. And so I came in, I was like the baby, and
Baby Lopez,
and that was my nickname. Actually, now that you mention it, that was my nickname, because we had another Lopez in the unit, and he was Big Lo, and I was Little Lo.
Yep, Low.
And look at that, we've all grown up, haven't we?
Yeah.
And so so we've had a lot of time I've known you now over 6 years.
Yeah. Which
is crazy to think about, but yeah, that's a long time to know somebody and not know them personally.
Right.
So, you know, obviously you live pretty far, and so it was pretty late when we hung out. I was like, hey, let's just don't drive home. I wouldn't risk it. So we had a little bit of a gathering here, and kicked it for the night, and we had nice little long chats like we normally do now. That's something that I wanted to change. Was conversations, and you know, we have those long life conversations that we have like hours at a time. We're like, oh Jesus, what time is it? I got to get back to work or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's been a couple times where that's happened, and that's been really cool. And I will say that one of my favorite things that I've part of the conversations you would have, and you would have these conversations in the Marine Corps, and I was a big fan of your conversations about connection and love and intimacy, and how all those things intertwine, not just in personal relationships, but in a lot of daily interactions, of how those things are important. And so before we get into that, I do want to know, you mentioned a little bit about growing up. How many siblings did you grow up with?
I had have three sisters. So as an only boy in the household, kind of a middle child, I have one older and two younger sisters. And we had I grew up in a 1.5 bathroom house.
Uh-huh.
So we all getting ready to go to school in the morning. My dad was a tech ed teacher, so 5 of us were getting ready to go to school in the morning. So we all had to use that one bathroom in order to do that. So it was controlled chaos in a sense.
And how do you think? Do you think that a lot of that sensitivity of the being more connected to the I guess the emotional side of yourself, do you think that comes from growing up with sisters, or do you think that's something you developed separately?
I think that's something I developed separately. In a sense, I could probably attribute it to the culmination or the accumulation of my life's experiences and interactions with people, including my family. But I think it was a separate experience that kind of made me deep dive into some of that kind of stuff. So,
growing up, how would you describe yourself? Were you a rambunctious kid? Were you rebellious?
Oh, no, I certainly wasn't rebellious. I would say I was probably shy, a little bit more introverted. And growing up in a town of 3,600 people, a very small town, and on a farm out in the country, without a vehicle or social media and all the platforms we stay so connected with today, we didn't have that. So we used our 320-acre backyard as kind of our playground, and that's what we used to entertain ourselves. So we'd be jumping around bales, climbing up climbing up in the barns, climbing up in trees. We had a bunch of barn cats and stuff, so we'd be playing with a new litter of kittens every spring. So
that must have been fun. Yeah. It probably formed your connection with. I don't know. I feel like having pets, because I grew up with some pets. My dad used to have. He's to this day he loves animals, but he always had a dog or a cat, something in the house roaming around, and so having a bond with like an animal does affect your personality. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you. That's I don't know how to describe that or really put it into words, but yeah.
Does it make you like? Do you think that it makes? Because for me, I feel like it made me a little bit more tender. Like it made me a little bit softer. Not necessarily. I don't know if it's towards people, but just in general, there's this animal that depends on you, and it's your friend, and it won't betray you. Like, does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
There's a different kind of connection. I don't know that I can connect with. It is like people, but it's not, because with friendships there is a maintenance, right?
Right.
Like there's a certain maintenance that goes on with friendships, and some of them are low maintenance, right? Some of the friends, we talked about this last night with the other guys. Sometimes some people are low maintenance friendships where you see each other maybe once every couple of years, and then you find out that they're married now and they have kids, but you talk to them like how you did when you were friends with them, hanging out all the time, and that doesn't waver throughout the years. And so those are stable, good relationships, right? But then you also have the different kinds of friendships that are more higher maintenance, like, hey, this is the friend I grew up with from childhood, and so this person I see more regularly, and they're in my life more frequently, and it does have a little bit more maintenance because there's more involved in it. This person has seen me change through the years, and so there's a deeper connection with this friend, and so you want to see them more than maybe you would somebody that you saw for a period of your time that you were in a certain phase, like the Marine Corps phase or the civilian phase. But those childhood friends follow you throughout all the phases, and so there's a different level of connection.
Yeah.
And I do feel like that's something that with pets, you also have a different kind of connection with. They have more. They do require that you feed them. And with cats, for example, it's a little different. With cats, they're lower maintenance.
Yeah.
And they'll come up to you, and when they want something from you, they'll like let you know. And so they're still your friend, right?
Yeah.
But just don't force them to do anything they don't want to do. You understand the boundary there.
Yeah, there's also like there's not really an expectation, just kind of like an assumed just, hey, I'm here, you're here, and we accept one another type of deal.
I do think that's true, and that's the case with dogs. And with dogs, it's no matter what. Like those, that's why they're man's best friend, right?
Yep.
With dogs, it's like, and I'm not saying this is the case for everybody. There are temperamental dogs, and some dogs do like misbehave here and there. They're animals, just like, I mean, we're animals too, really. And so we misbehave just like anybody else, just like any other animal. We just do it in a more intellectual way, but still misbehaving. And so, but generally, dogs are waiting for you to get home, wagging their tail when they see you arrive, and they're happy to see you, right?
Yeah.
And their life revolves around waiting for you to come home. Where with humans, it's, let's say you're in a relationship, an intimate relationship. Some relationships do like being closer and having more conversations, and some are more spaced apart. And sometimes even we lack the communication. We talk about pets where sometimes things are assumed. Well, with people too, right? Like sometimes you didn't know that this one thing bothered a person because they didn't want to say it because they didn't want to upset you.
Right.
And then it turns into this big thing because you assumed. Like, oh, well, I just assumed that you would recognize it. It's like, no, I need to know.
Yeah, the communication's a big part of that for sure.
And so before we dive too much into that, I want to ask you, just like I ask everybody else, every other Marine, what made you want to be a Marine?
What made me want to be a Marine? Huh. You're really putting me on the spot here with this one. I think I didn't really have much of an idea of Marines or what a Marine was prior to joining, or even prior to my recruiter speaking to me. So I guess my perception of what a Marine was just like, I didn't know. I thought they were basically like a James Bond type of situation, you know, and I'm just like,
like CIA, FBI, like secret agents. Is that what you're
maybe
thinking?
not necessarily that,
Yeah.
but like doing weird stuff in other countries that no one knows about, right? Like
Covert, like special, like black ops.
Not even necessarily like black ops, but definitely covert stuff, because you know the only time I would ever hear of or see Marines was literally on the news in Iraq or Afghanistan, right? And that's the only time I never met face with one other than my recruiter, especially in geographically where I was located. So it's not like you're walking down the street and can tell, well, unless you're a Marine, obviously, like you could tell, hey, like that guy looks like he's pretty locked on. He's probably a Marine, right? Yeah, I don't know. I guess what made me want to be a Marine was the challenge. You know, there was definitely an element of also the unknown, right? Because there's a lot of stuff. Hey, do you want to be a Marine? Well, maybe, but what does that entail exactly? We're not going to tell you, but do you want to be? Right? And it's like, okay, you know, like sure, yeah, like
ooh, it's mysterious.
Let's go after it. So you dive head first into the unknown, right? You conquer that. That's an initial fear for a lot of people, is the unknown. They want to be certain, and people want to live a life of certainty, and they find comfort in going into the same house every day in a very routine, maybe even monotonous job or lifestyle, right? They have the same schedule. They go through the same routine every day. They go to work. They go home. They go to the gym, whatever. So it becomes very, very structured and very linear, right? But also kind of stagnant. Me, I like jumping into new things, new experiences, things like that. So yeah, it was definitely the unknown and to challenge myself for sure.
How do you think the Marine Corps has affected your personality?
How has it affected my personality? I think in a lot of ways, it made me far more confident, especially after getting off of active duty. I did 4 years active, and then the rest of the time was reserve. So during that active duty time, after getting out, I applied for this job, and I ended up being managing 5 departments at Eagle Window and Door in Dubuque, Iowa. So I had like 36 associates under me and 5 different departments, and I was expected to manage all of that at 24 years old. So obviously there was some sort of confidence or something about me that spoke to that position. So there'll be character things that you don't even recognize in yourself that other people see, right? So I think it's not even like a confidence that is a cocky or arrogant confidence. It's just literally this aura that you kind of give off from it. Now that does vary on the individual and also their prior experiences, because I think resentment can be a big thing, and people carry that throughout life as well.
What do you mean by that? Resentment?
Whether it's toward parents, a relationship, an injury, or some life experience that you're not appreciative of, and maybe also kind of analyze maybe more than you should, because you go into analyzing things and you're like, okay, if this one thing would have happened differently, we'd be in a completely different trajectory in life, and I'd be living a completely different life right now. Right? But it didn't. You can't change that, right? So you get this kind of resentment, and that's that dwelling and reliving that situation, but you can't do anything about it. You can only kind of move forward from that. So
right.
Yeah.
What do you think the Marine Corps taught you about leadership?
What I think it taught me about leadership, especially in the NCO ranks, not the officers, right? So the officer side, there's kind of an expected leadership role of you. You know, you go in and you're already expected to be a leader. whereas you don't have the experience of working all of the positions like an NCO or an enlisted guy does, or Marine. So someone on the enlisted side has the experience of being the janitor before they're developed into a leadership role. So they respect every position, right?
You know what PFC stands for, right?
Perfect for cleaning, baby.
Yep. That's just it.
Yep. And there's also that respect that's, hey, like, I did my time, now it's your turn. It's a rite of passage, or like a coming of age type of thing. So yeah.
And so how have you grown throughout your tenure in the Marine Corps? Because obviously I could tell you, for me, I'm not the same person I was at the end of my enlistment than I was at the beginning. What changed for you?
I guess from the beginning of my enlistment to the end, I think what changed was humbling life experiences, but also you realize that you know, not everything's about you, right? There's a bigger picture in everything. Now, I would say after leaving the Marine Corps, there was definitely some things that got to me, but it really had nothing really to do. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, because everything's kind of intertwined, right? So maybe with my experience in the military and then the recent like political climate, you know, you kind of take things a little bit more personal, because, you know, you recognize that you and everyone that you've brought up, right? Because especially in the Marine Corps and leadership, is like you have this conglomerate of just a motley crew of individuals from all walks of life, all backgrounds, varying levels of intelligence, and work ethic, and different,
Different cultures.
Different cultures is a big one, but then also like different. What do I want to say? Like, you know, ADHD is supposed to be a disqualifying factor for the military, right? Now, however, that has to be diagnosed prior to, and that it really requires almost like a psych eval, right? And they're not going to spend the money on testing you to be like, oh, hey, you have ADHD, you can't join. It's like, no, you haven't been diagnosed with ADHD yet up until this point, so you're clear to join.
Yes.
And then they end up in the military, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely different. It's not like someone is lazy or doesn't want to work. It's like, no, their brain works different, you know. And you have to accept that, because the other thing is there's a benefit to all of those things, and then we're able to take advantage and use everyone to the best of their capability with what they're good at, right? Just because someone might have ADHD doesn't mean like, oh no, we can't use them for anything. It's like, no, they're a specialist. They're going to be really good at this, so we're going to put them here, and they're going to excel.
That's something. That's why I was curious about what you were going to say, because that's a leadership mentality. You're looking at it from like the background. You're looking at it from further back. You're seeing the bigger picture of one of the things that leadership does teach you is it teaches you delegation, but delegation that's effective, right? So I know this guy's good at doing this, and so we're going to put this guy here, but we want people to learn. The new guys that came in here, hey, hang around him. You know, these people are going to hang out here. He's going to teach all of you guys how to do this thing, because he's a specialist at this. And so we're going to have him do that. And so while he's setting up, right, he's also going to teach. And so we know it's going to get set up properly, but he's also then giving the benefit of teaching that knowledge to all the other guys that are there that you know he's a specialist at. So the way that I think that's one of the ways that it affects you, is that when you're put in a leadership position, you have to look at everybody and see what they're good at and analyze them, be like, oh, this person's good at this thing. And you'll see this in like the meetings that we used to have in the NCO lounge, right? Where all the non-commissioned officers got together and talked about what the plan is and logistics. And then you look at, okay, we want to put this person in a leadership position, squad leader or fire team leader. And so what are they good at? Well, they're a specialist in radio, let's say, for example. This guy's, we had a couple of those guys that were like radio nerds, that those guys didn't need notes. Those guys could just pull the equipment out, and from their brain, they have photographic memory. That's what we talked about, right? Yep. Like specialists in their mind, the way their brain work is very different from other people. Most people don't have photographic memories. I think that's something that is something you have to note on the individual from seeing them, right?
Absolutely.
And so then that's what a leadership position does to you is it forces you to look at that, because ultimately whether the overall mission is completed appropriately depends on who you put in what position as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say your op fails, right? We have to set up radios and talk to each other from point A to point B. And one side, the guy that was put to set up the radios, because I didn't look at him well enough, the guys that I had, I put the guy that was good at radio and I put him to load equipment and to do stuff that younger Marines than him normally do. And so now this guy's out of the setup process, and we're putting a guy that's less experienced because we didn't do our diligent job of delegating properly. Now we set the wrong people to do the wrong things.
Yeah, and that's neither a good, I wouldn't say a good or a bad thing, because some people perform better under pressure.
That's
right?
true.
So, and then when you're kind of put in a position where it's like, hey, you either learn this or you fail, then typically, well, I shouldn't say typically. Sometimes people will either take that position and be like the pressure thing, and learn that, and then also retain it better. So you could have done them a favor by doing that. And then on the flip side, you could put someone with high pressure, and they would absolutely fail. It's so much based. It's definitely based on the individual. But I think one thing with leadership too is, there's things that become apparent to you, and that's a pun. Okay, so it's becoming apparent. Right. As things become apparent,
yes,
meaning that, hey, you're becoming apparent. You realize and recognize, especially after you separate from service, you're like, dang, it's like, I'm like, these are kind of like my kids. I grew up teaching them and watching them grow and learn, and you definitely take pride in that. And it's recognizing those traits in those individuals and then placing them in the right positions where they're able to excel. So and that's seeing, what being a parent is, right?
Yeah. No, I think that it has a lot to do with that. And so like I hear jokes all the time, like for example of General Mattis, like he's not a biological father, but he is a father to many in the Marine Corps. And that's because of just his experience, his leadership experience. You see people grow up. He's witnessed, I'm sure, countless guys grow up in the Marine Corps and then maybe model their leadership after him, almost like a son would to his father. Right. And so I do think that although it takes more to just be, it's easy enough to be a biological father, but I do think it does speak to how intimate and involved being a leader is, whether you're a dad or you're a leader to troops. It does take a similar level of dedication. Do you agree?
I agree 100%.
And so I would say one thing that I do want to know about you specifically is what made you want to come back? Because you mentioned leaving, and I witnessed when you were there for a little bit and then you checked out, and as far as I knew, you were just you were past your obligated time anyway, and so you checked out, and I was like, okay, and so then you came back. And you mentioned this, but you never quite hit the why, the true why. What were you contemplating? What made you want to come back?
I don't know. I guess there was just some life changes in my life, and I missed the Marine Corps. It's always going to be a part of you, right? And you will miss that. But I think at some point you have to make a decision, especially that's one thing that I recognized in my roles in the reserves is I was kind of spreading myself too thin. Here I am doing tile, cryotherapy, Marine Corps. It's like I'm all over the place, right? It's kind of like that ADHD thing. It's like, holy smokes, I got all this stuff going on. All these relationships, like you mentioned, trying to maintain the maintenance involved with these relationships, and then the resentment that some people have towards you for not giving them the attention that
you didn't know they needed.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so then I think that so basically the image that I'm getting is that you did say you missed the Marine Corps, but do you think I always say that when I think I missed the Marine Corps, I mean that I miss Marines.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Marines, yeah. You absolutely miss the Marines.
When you came back, though, a lot of the guys that you were with were checked out and gone. Did it feel the same?
No, it was much different. Especially with I was much older at this point, and much more experienced in life and in different roles. So even further developed, even on a civilian side where you don't necessarily have all that structure and you do have to kind of figure stuff out more on your own. You're not given some of the guidance and literal, hey, do this. So coming back with seeing how young the Marines were in the shop, right? Here I am, I'm looking at this situation. And then I'm also putting myself in their shoes. I'm like, looking at these guys, I'm like, damn, I used to be young like that. And here I am seeing these guys with my own eyes. Like, to me, I look at them like, dang, these guys are children. And here I am, like, having this, like, epiphanal moment where I'm like, wow, or this, revelation where it's like, hey, I was just a kid, and that's how I was viewed by my leadership, probably. So it became like much more of like, hey, I'm more responsible for these guys now than I ever have been, because you see that in them now, and you're like, dang, these guys are here, and they need good, solid leadership, and it's
it becomes noticeable the difference in maturity.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I at some point noticed too, and it's there's this joke that goes around about whenever you get pinned NCO, right, for the first time, you're corporal for the first time you get pinned, it's almost like they plug a USB drive into you, and suddenly you start having answers for things you didn't have before. People ask you questions. I remember when I was pinned that same weekend, people started asking me questions like, Corporal, how do you do this? I was like, well, yeah, you just do blah, blah, blah. I was like, where did that come from?
Programmed confidence.
Programmed confidence.
That's what that is, because, boom, now you got that rank, and now you have that hit of dopamine, and you're like, boom, yeah, I got this. So you're pulling stuff out of your brain because now you're in a situation where you feel good, proud of yourself, and that's that confidence development. So just that action of being pinned on to the next rank, particularly the NCO ranks, is, you take ownership of it.
And last thing we'll discuss about the Marine Corps. Well, not the last thing, but the last thing about your career, Marine Corps career specifically. What now that you've had the time and you realize, wow, there's a difference now. Like, I can notice the maturity difference, and so at what point do you go, do I want to stay in? Like, what was it for you?
It was knowing that, you can be a jack of all trades, but you'll never be a master of one. So to kind of let go of that, and then also energy. I got to think in terms of energy. What am I giving my energy to, and what do I want to focus it on, right? So if my energy is being taken here, it is costing here, right? So if I can redirect that energy into a different mission or goal in life, then that's what I want to do. I can be a little bit more far-reaching than the platoon of Marines, and then also the trust and confidence and ability of the Marines that you kind of, for lack of a better term, I guess, leave behind. You trust that, hey, in order to maybe further develop them as leaders, it might require the people who are good leaders to leave, right? Because then none of them, it's
they're not reliant on this guy to figure things out for them, right?
Right. Like, you have to be a unit that can figure it out on your own, and in the absence of a leader, someone needs to step up to the plate to be the next leader, and the Marine Corps does a very good job of that through the rank structure.
You mentioned yesterday about public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
How do you specifically feel about that? Do you feel like that's something you've struggled with, or do you think that that's something that you've had in you and you've just honed in?
I guess public speaking is difficult, right? So in my eyes, the only two things in life that motivate you to do anything are love and fear. everything else is a derivative of those two things. So when the public speaking is probably the number one biggest fear for people in the United States, or maybe even globally for that matter. But it's not actually public speaking that they're afraid of. Judgment is what they're afraid of, right? So you have to get past the judgment or caring about what other people think of you in order to be an effective public speaker.
And so is that something that have you struggled with that? And how so?
In high school, I did forensics competitions, so that got me out of my element. You face your fear at that point. You're like, hey, it is what it is, and you know what? I may not ever have to see these people again, so why not? Get up there, try it, do your thing. But then also, I think that with the Marine Corps and the confidence that it grows or instills in you as an individual helps boost your confidence, and therefore you just have this much more of a command presence to you, and that confidence reflects through in public speaking, and you're not necessarily, I think, just in doing so, you're no longer afraid of public speaking. So,
and for you, you mentioned facing that fear of judgment and not focusing so much on what others think about you. I think that what I found anyway is that, first of all, I was a very timid person, just like you mentioned. Like when I was a kid, I was quiet. I did not really make much noise. I just kind of I've always considered myself a wallflower. And some of my family members have told me, no, I feel like you've been pretty, your voice has been heard. We've throughout the time we've known you, you've been pretty vocal. I'm like, yeah, with you guys, because I'm comfortable with you.
Right.
But with people that I don't know, with people that I just met or that I'm not very close with, no, I was very quiet. You just never saw that side of me because I was comfortable with you guys. And that's something I've had to develop, is being in front of people that I don't know or don't know well and say things. I attribute that to the military, of being put in those positions where you have to do it. And the best way to do it, if you are afraid, is to do it afraid. Simple as that. Do it afraid, and then do it enough times where you're no longer afraid.
Yes.
Sounds simple, very scary to do. And that's what it took for me, is I had to stumble. I had to sound dumb many times over until I was like, okay, well then I'm just going to sound dumb then until I'm not.
Yep.
Have you heard the saying, you only ask a dumb question once, and after that, it's not dumb anymore because you know?
Right? Exactly.
And that's how I feel how it is when it comes to public speaking too, is you go up there, well, not once, maybe you probably have to stumble. I stumbled like a handful of times before I got the handle of how to publicly speak, even if I don't really know what I'm talking about. I can at least go, well, there's a basic point I want to hit. I don't know how I'm going to get from A to Z, but I know that there's certain letters in between that I need to get through. And if anybody has any opinion, now would be a good time, because I know you guys want to get to Z and I want to get to Z, but I don't know B, C, D, and E. So who knows it? And let's figure it out, right? That's leadership. Mm-hmm. You don't have to know everything. You just have to know who knows things.
Yes, you can know who knows things, but then there's one of my dad's favorite quotes is a quote by Aristotle, and I related a lot to construction or anything in the trades, because that knowledge came from somewhere. Someone had to invent it at some point, and you can reinvent the wheel. There's not necessarily any one right or wrong way to do something, especially if you learn something from it. But the quote from Aristotle is, for the things that we have to learn to do before we can do them, we learn by doing them. Mm-hmm. Public speaking is another one of those things. So, yeah.
You mentioned relationships.
Yeah.
What specifically do you find important about relationships, and what do you mean? In what facet?
Okay, so I believe, I look at everything in life as a relationship, whether it's with your pet, or other people, friends, family, personal, professional. Yep. Right? And I think those relationships are built on three things: trust, communication, and intimacy. Now, people get a little, put off by intimacy because they think something romantic or whatever. But intimacy really is just marked by closeness. Like, for example, like, what's more intimate, me sending you a text message or sitting across from a table with you having a podcast, you know?
I think the latter.
Yeah, this is far more intimate than a text message or an email ever will be. And the communication is far more effective because we have tone of voice and body language, right? So that's those nonverbal communication, the eye contact, all of that. And that's why, as far as communication goes, that FaceTime is so important and valuable. So, and where I kind of learned or really analyzed these things is relationships, particularly with the military and Marines or anyone deploying. There's really three things that break down because, you see so many of your friends come back to an empty house, an empty bank account, whatever it might be. Now, I get that you can put in a lot of work to something that may not be worth salvaging or vice versa. We never really know what the right answer is to a lot of things, but the things that cause the relationship to fall apart in the first place is I've watched the intimacy break down because obviously that couple is no longer even having dinner in a face-to-face conversations or the physical touch aspect of that relationship. So the intimacy is the first thing that falls through, right? The second thing is the communication because you're on a 12, 14-hour time difference because you're deployed overseas while your spouse is back here in the States, stateside, and dealing with their own schedule. If they have children or other things involved there, now you have one person to manage that instead of used to be a team of two to manage that. So the communication breaks down, and the last thing that you're left with in that element of that relationship is trust, right? So if the trust falls through at that point, the relationship is dissolved. So that's where I really analyzed relationships, and I saw that not only does it apply in that situation, but it applies in your personal relationships with family, your friends, your coworkers, no matter what. If you're trying to do sales with your customers, that intimacy, communication, and trust, if it's breaking down in that reversed order, as long as you still have the trust, you can probably rebuild that relationship.
How do you define trust?
So trust is, I would define trust as, I would say trust is knowing intention versus things are intentional versus non-intentional, right? Or unintentional. And I think if something is done intentionally, then the trust is gone. Like, for example, if I would step outside of the relationship, if it's a business relationship, if I step outside to go to a competitor, that trust is gone, right? In a romantic relationship, if you cheat, that's stepping outside because you know it's going to hurt your partner, whether that's intentional or not. If you know that's going
that action will hurt them regardless of how you want to see it.
Right. So unless that communication, cause people have some weird arrangements in relationships, right? Okay. There's some weird stuff going on out there. But, I mean, unless that communication has been had prior to, right? And I think that's important to let the other person know is like, hey, are we official? Are we, is it, I want to be exclusive, right? So in an exclusive relationship, you know better, both parties know better than to step outside of that relationship.
So what do you think? Do you think establishing boundaries is a part of trust, right? Like knowing each other's boundaries? Do you think that's a facet of trust?
I think so, because I think communication builds trust or helps build trust. And then I think trust is I guess that's also communication, because nonverbal stuff, including like the 5 love languages. If I give you a gift, even if it's my gift of time, which is quality time, right? That helps build trust. It lets me know that you're invested, right?
Right.
And I look at that as, how invested is someone in the relationship. So I think that's that's a big definer of trust. And then it's also, I think everyone kind of knows that what helps everyone trust someone else is knowing that other person defends your name in a room that you're not in. Definitely helps build trust. And I think another thing that's important for trust is, hey, having that face-to-face conversation, like, hey, putting that person on the spot, hey, this is what I expect. So it's maybe not even necessarily a boundary, but an expectation too. So you got to define those expectations as well.
Right. And so all those, I don't think those are, I think those are built at the same time, no? Like,
yeah. I mean, it's all kind of
these structure, like there isn't a trust first, then intimacy, or then communication, then intimacy. It's like, hey, we have to communicate to establish where our lines are, because you mentioned, right, this is the line, and stepping outside of the line knowingly, right?
Yep. That's
a break of trust. And so then in order to have had that, you either communicated or you didn't. And so I do think that if you don't do the others, the trust part can't be there. No?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely like a package kind of deal, but I would say that even if say I went like no contact with my parents for like 10 years, you know, I end up going like overseas and end up being a POW, right?
Yeah.
I still trust my family.
Yeah.
Right? I still trust them to do whatever they feel like is necessary, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that the communication or the intimacy need to be there in any way, shape, or form for the trust to still exist.
Sure. After it's been established, right? Right.
Correct.
So during the building process, though,
yeah,
that needs to happen simultaneously, no? You don't think so?
I think trust can be coached into someone, right? And that's kind of like the Marine Corps thing, right? A Marine does not lie, cheat, or steal.
Right.
So, and that's a value that we try to instill in everyone. And yeah, I don't know. I think for the most part, you know, I trust Marines. I just do. So,
that's an interesting point. But that's something. It's something like you're taught that, like it's communicated to you that Marines are trustworthy. In the same way that when you grow up, you believe, you know, you're taught that police officers are good people and that you should trust them, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that something that is built through communication of some sort? Because drill instructors, let's be honest, they're not the greatest communicators, right? Yeah. Like they say things, they say a lot of things, but you only really learn when the herd is moving in one direction. You're like, oh, they get mad when we do this thing.
Yeah,
and so,
right.
and so we just won't do this.
True, yep.
And so I do think that it is instilled and like it is communicated in you first. Like it's taught to you that these, no matter what, because you were around it and you saw it and you heard it, you then created trust.
Yeah.
Because you were around it. So you witnessed it, you heard it, and that's all the levels of that you were mentioning, right? Like communication and that level of intimacy. Being there is intimacy.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Being next to the guy guy or girl to the left or the right of you and seeing them go through the same thing you're going through, it does build, that is intimacy. That is a certain level of intimacy where you're going through hardships together.
Absolutely.
And so I do think that it's already established by the time you get to your unit and you're like, I trust this guy because he's a Marine because I know what he went through because I was there.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So I do think that it is taught to you just earlier. It just happens. It builds earlier, the communication and intimacy and then trust. The trust is the byproduct, no?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah, because you don't even recognize this stuff is happening to you until it's happened.
Yeah. Once you're there, you're like, oh, I just trust this guy.
Yeah.
And that's the case. And that's why I say, like, I do think that it's a byproduct then, not necessarily like, yes, it's built together, but the result is trust of when you add the communication and the intimacy together. And then it's like a cocktail that creates trust. Maybe?
Yeah.
I feel like that might be it.
It's unreal how you come to these points of revelation when you reflect on all of these experiences, right? If you really take a minute to sit down, think about them, analyze them, and ask the why, right? The root cause analysis, and then understanding the entire process from start to finish, and almost reverse engineering the whole system, right? Because it's like, our drill instructors did this, but why? And then we did this, but why? And then we did this, but why, right? And then you start answering those whys, you're like, whoa, right? Here we are at boot camp, we're in a squad bay of 100 Marines with, or recruits, because we're not yet Marines at that point. But we're essentially like livestock going through a process to be processed into, whatever. So in that process, when we're sleeping so close to one another and so tightly packed in close proximity, right? Any communicable diseases. So this reminded me of the whole COVID situation. Yeah, like respiratory illnesses, one infection could potentially disrupt the training of 100 new Marines, right? And especially sleeping so close to one another, that explains why we were so heavy on the cleaning, right? And bleaching everything. Everything was sanitary, spick and span, spit shine. So that all made sense. Going through the assembly line where we're getting the penicillin shots in our ass once a month, the peanut butter shot. Yep. And then you're like, well, dang, yeah, that makes sense, because one little illness could spread to all 100 of these Marines in this bay like that.
And think about this, because even with all those precautions, it's still like I still got. Have you heard of the recruit crud?
Yes.
And so when I went through, I got a pretty rough upper respiratory infection, and I was hacking up mucus for like a solid month and a half of boot camp. And that was with the peanut butter shots. That was it. Imagine if we wouldn't have had any of those precautions in place and we just got thrown together. No shots at all, no penicillin, no nothing. Just good luck.
Yeah.
The amount of people that would just drop from pneumonia. And even still, it's crazy. Even still, some people did end up getting pneumonia.
Yep.
It became less frequent, right? With the penicillin and all that. It at least weakens the infection you get. And I think that's the purpose, is just do enough to get them through. And I think that they mastered that, because for the most part, yeah, we all got sick, but we still got through it.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because in boot camp I went to medical one morning and I got they prescribed me like Mucinex and then 3 other pills, right? And they said I had upper respiratory infection, pneumonia, and bronchitis all at the same time, right? So I had to fight through all of those upper respiratory infection, or all those respiratory ailments through boot camp. But, had I not gotten them, would my respiratory system be what it is today?
Right.
Probably not. And then prior to going to boot camp, I had actually smoked cigarettes. So you can't have tobacco when you go to boot camp, right? And the doctor literally said, he's like, hey, did you smoke before coming to boot camp? And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, had they allowed you to smoke in boot camp, like if you were able to have your cigarette every day, you probably wouldn't, none of this would be going on to you right now. I'm like, well, that's kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting information that I am not surprised you heard in boot camp.
And it's like, well, why are you telling me that? Because you're a doctor. You're supposed to shut that stuff out anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
But I do think that when you do get the shots, it does die down the severity of the upper respiratory infection that you get. And I think we got more than one. I want to say we got one once a month.
Yes. So we got a total of 4 of those. You had one a month at boot camp, so 3 months there, and then they gave you one as soon as you got to MCT.
Yep.
They would do that. So 4 shots, yeah.
And it really kind of disappears after that, because you don't really get together in masses again like that, unless it's like massive training exercises. But even still, you're segregated to your groups that you come with, right? Yep. So you're around those germs. The whole idea, right, of why you do that is because you're having germs of 50 different states come into one room.
Yes.
And so that's insane. the amount of different variations of germs that come in, it's impossible to try to treat every level of infection that you'll get. And so the only thing you can do is attack it at mass. And so you throw penicillin at it because it's a general medication that treats as many viruses as possible, but you're still going to get some that come through.
And then the herd immunity. Right?
Yeah, the herd immunity. That's true.
You're passing some of this stuff on.
Yes.
And now everyone as a group is developing certain antibodies that they never would have had before.
That's true.
So I don't know if you noticed this, but after I got out of especially after boot camp or even later on, it's like I never got the flu. I never got any of these sicknesses that a lot of other people are getting. I'm like, I don't know.
Herd immunity, and
I
I do think that I did have like an iron lung after that. I didn't really get. I don't think I've actually had an upper respiratory infection ever since then. Actually,
exactly.
The only thing I do get from time to time is like a cold, like a mild, very mild cold, sniffles for like a week, and it's gone. Yep. I don't get upper respiratory infections. I don't get really anything severe. And I think I have the Marine Corps to thank for that. But I did want to hit one last topic with you. That's what we have time for. We are on a mental health podcast.
Yeah.
And so I did want to hit, if you wanted to cover that topic, mental health. What does that mean to you?
Mental health. There's 7 Marines that I knew that committed suicide. So it's definitely something that speaks to me, and it's something that it's important to take care of. And I don't know really what the best way to approach it is. I think everyone handles things individually. I think males obviously are at a higher risk for those situations, and I think that everyone wants empathy, but yet they're not willing to really demonstrate it, right? Especially toward men. So. I think that really you have to be mindful of your subconscious, because that subconscious thoughts manifest themselves into the conscious realm. So that's one thing to be mindful of, and the literal and figurative things. So I know I get into trouble with this on social media a lot, especially Facebook, because that's kind of a place I vent, or, maybe put some feelers out to see how people are going to react, or do whatever they're going to do with with what I'm putting out there. But a lot of times I'm such a figurative thinker, right? I'm an abstract. I think figuratively and not quite literally, right? And in doing so, people can take that literally or personally, and it was never meant to be literal or personal, right? So, and then joking and sarcasm, but that again comes with the relationship, trust, communication, and intimacy. So the body language thing and being able to tell that kind of stuff. So that's where you get in trouble with text. So
what was, if you don't mind me asking, how did you hear of your Marines passing?
Usually it was like a Facebook post, or someone else, concerned about not hearing from someone. So usually social media. So those are the Marines that I know of, right? Now there could be more that I served with that I haven't kept in contact with, or maybe they never had or don't have social media, or just never really placed value on staying in touch with people that they served with, which is totally fine. That's on them, and that's so I don't know. It could be more than that, but usually it was through the grapevine. Through the Lance Corporal Underground. Right.
Well, Lance Corporal Underground, we know they get everything. They know they figure all the information, and that includes the tragic ones. I want to hit on something you said about mental health, specifically when it comes to men. I do think, this is just my opinion, and I want to know yours. I do think that not only is it a societal thing, I do believe, and I've seen it myself, unfortunately, I have seen it in the Marine Corps pretty often, of snubbing our own when it comes to mental health. Of like, don't do that here, right? And I get it. When we're in, if we're in a combat zone, there's no time for that. Like, it's life and death. Like, we got to get home first. Your feelings, we'll deal with that. There'll be time for that once we get back. And that's the part that I don't think happens, is that we'll do that later. You're just taught that you're going to do it later, but you're not. And this isn't a thing. Like, I've never been to combat, and yet that's the mentality, right? Of like, oh, well, in case you go to combat, we have to be like this. And I don't think that we do ourselves any favors when we do that.
Yeah, it's the whole conflict delayed is conflict multiplied thing. So, if we continually defer that conflict, Jordan Peterson just has that great quote. When you continually defer that conflict, it's just going to build up. So if you can bite something in the bud as soon as possible, it's like that. You get two people kind of butting heads with one another. As soon as you can interject in that interaction, the better, right? Because then you can break it up, and then or you can also kind of escalate it, a little bit in the meantime, to where, like, for example, take it to the pit, right? You guys got beef with each other, take it to the pit,
right?
You go handle it in the pit, and then you'll see typically with men, if you get into a beef with another man and you're actually able to release those frustrations and kind of duke it out, you'll see two guys that get in a fist fight with one another, whether it's the bar or wherever it might be, and after that, they're like best friends, man. But chicks, they get into a fight, and it's like they take that resentment with them to the grave.
So I do think that I do believe that when you when guys vent their frustrations in that way of like aggression, and yes, in the moment their aggression is settled, but I don't think the problem at large is. And so I think that I think that sometimes for some it does work. I'm not saying this is the case for everybody, but I do think that if we don't address why why did that upset you when I said that, right? Like, if that isn't addressed, yes, that anger you feel in the moment is dispersed. And so then when there's no anger there, well, of course I can have a conversation with you, and it's almost like you start over, right? It's like a Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah.
You kind of reset the image. But then if you redraw the same design that caused the fight in the first place, it's just etch and sketch again. We're like, oh, we're going to have to fight again. We're going to have to fight again. And I do think that it creates that comfortability of like, well, we'll just fight when we have a problem.
Yeah, that's true as well. If you're trying to avoid that conflict, there's two ways to go about that. One is either you have to accept the relationship as it is, or what you said it there, what is causing it. So you kind of have to identify that, right?
Right.
And then once you do identify it, okay, what can I change? What can I control? What do I have control over in this situation? Right. And then I don't think it's, to any harm or foul, but the people, we can't make people that don't want to be involved with this topic involved.
Right.
But it's important to create the community of people who do care about this topic and get them involved. Right.
Yes.
So, but in, a lot of people with the stigma around it, you're looked at as being weak, or, you gave up, or whatever stigma, again, but that's fear of judgment, right? So I think that's
a tough one.
It is, man.
Because here's the problem, right? And I guess you could call this devil's advocate. So here's the problem. Okay, so in an ideal world, we can sit down in the Marine Corps specifically, because it's the only experience I can really speak to where I've seen this at large, is you'll have this thing where you have a problem and you have a beef and you go to the pit and you guys duke it out, and then you're not angry anymore in the moment, right? And you go back to chatting again. The problem that you have here in the military is that you can't not work with them. They
true.
Don't go away.
Right.
They don't, unless they get out. That's the only way. But like, you're stuck with that individual for however many years they have left on their contract. That's different from civilian side. From civilian side, if I don't like the people I work with, I'm leaving this job. I don't want to deal with any of you, right?
Yep.
And you're gone.
You signed the contract.
Right.
Yep.
And so then that's an element that has to be mentioned, right? And so then how do you deal with that situation where you can't not deal with that person?
Yeah, because that comes in like in a civilian side, you have like human resources, right? Now, in the Marine Corps, you might have the chain of command that you can use for certain things. But I always, one of the big things I would do is like to handle things the lowest level possible. I believe in escalation. I mean, in the Marine Corps, we're taught escalation of force. We should also be taught de-escalation of force, right? So how do we manage that conflict? Because again, that's conflict management, and that's kind of what we do as Marines. We go and we manage conflict. So
rather aggressively,
yeah, right, absolutely. So one is the mentality is, hey, there's going to be conflict. We need to learn we need to learn to accept it, right? And then I guess the other thing with that is you got to be able to learn to work together. That is true with the civilian side. You can either, or if someone doesn't like you, you just get fired. Right?
Exactly.
It's like,
exactly. Yeah.
But I guess where I'm going with that is like you have to be okay with people not liking you, and almost develop the mentality like, hey, I'm totally cool if no one likes me. And then along my journey, oh, this person likes me? Cool. I like you too, man. Like you can reciprocate that. But yeah.
I think that what does matter is, and I do think it ties back to the individual. I think that if the individual, and I do think this is effective whether you're in or out of the military, and maybe this is the solution. If you the individual have as much control as possible of your emotions, meaning that when you feel insulted by somebody, because this happens a lot, and I've seen it, where somebody disrespects somebody, like talks to you a certain way, condescending way that you take offense to. If you take offense every time to somebody saying something to you in a way that's condescending to you or disrespectful in any way, then you can almost guarantee that the conflict will at least begin when you take offense. And so what can we do there? What if I was able to figure out why I was offended by that thing? Like, what is it? Did I feel this way before? Right? Like,
Right.
Did I feel like lower, lesser at some point? Does it remind me of something? Why am I so hurt or insulted when this individual speaks to me a certain way?
Well, sometimes that can be because you really look up to someone and then they speak to you in that way, and you're like, dang, I really respect you, and here you are talking to me like that. It's
What's the root feeling, right? Isn't that rejection?
I don't think it's rejection. Okay, because
Or the feeling is of not necessarily that it has to be, but you feel rejected.
right. I don't think it's that. I just think you want to have a mutual respect, right? Especially for someone that you do respect, right? Like if I went up to go shake Arnold Schwarzenegger's hand, right? I'd be like, hey, I respect you, and he's just like, who are you? I'd be like, right. But the blessing in that is like, wait a minute, why am I getting offended? Maybe that him doing that is going to light a fire under me where I get jacked, and now I become like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? The next bodybuilder, right?
Yeah.
So just because of that, I was offended by that. That can also be motivation toward something productive in life. Like, say, for example, this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. That's what sets the wheel in motion for things later in life. So you can't look at things being that you take offense to as necessarily bad things, because I don't know. That's I've kind of like learned to like let go of a lot of things and just let the ball roll, man. Because you can take some of those things and then really come up with a plan. And I mean, you did something great here. You put this podcast together. You got this great idea. You went and got the equipment. So you're doing this and you're inspiring a lot of people. You're occupying your time in a very healthy way, because Other people who say might get offended by what you said would be like, oh, shoot, what am I going to do? I'm going to go grab a beer, or I'm going to go, do some blow or smoke some weed or whatever it might be, right? That'd be like a coping mechanism. So I think there's definitely healthy things, and that's the route I would like to see people go,
Or the route that I see a lot that is common is to attack it, right? Because if the thing that hurt my feelings is evil, then I don't have to do much of any work because I'm the good person here. And I think that happens a lot. I think that when you're insulted by something, there's this viewpoint of they're the bad person and I'm the good one, and so then I don't have to change. I don't have to address anything about myself because the point that hurt me is evil. Right. And so if everybody sees it that way, or a mass majority of people see it that way, then we have a group of people that have a lot of insecurities and a lot of trauma that they aren't dealing with and that they should address. And if they did address, would be I don't know if happier is the right word, but less offended.
Yeah.
Because you know yourself. When you know yourself, you trust who you are. There's nothing anybody can say that can really throw you off that. Because you know yourself well. Like I know what I've experienced. I know why I experienced what I experienced, and I am better than I was yesterday. And that's all I can ask of myself. If you have that honest conversation with yourself, and that's deep within you, that's a belief, not just something you say to yourself, then there's not much that can derail you. Yes. And so then the offense is non-existent, or at least manageable.
Absolutely. So. Trauma, first of all, is in the eye of the beholder. That's something completely relative to the individual. Someone could go out and watch a cat get hit by a car in the middle of a road and be like, oh my gosh, that's a traumatic experience. And then someone else could be like, oh, a cat got ran over. Cool. Whoop-de-doo, right? Completely unfazed by it. Another thing is you got to ask yourself, why am I placing value on what that person thinks? Mm-hmm. What is it about me that's giving them value, or that opinion value? Mm-hmm. And then also like the merit behind it, right? And then I guess in communication, where sometimes we're left to decipher what their intent was, because we don't know what their intent was, right? Mm-hmm. That's the crazy thing about intent is only I know my intentions, or true intentions, right?
Right.
That's something that you have to, or as individuals, we have to figure out from the other person, right? Especially in a dating situation where you're dating someone. Okay, what is this person's intentions? What do they want with me? Do they want to get married and have kids and start a family, or do they just want to have fun, or do they just want to be my friend, or do they just want to cut ties altogether? Like, what is their intention with me?
Sure.
Right? And then we also can't make everyone happy, right? If I marry one girl, there's another girl who I'm not going to marry.
Yeah.
And she might get offended by that, right? So who's in the right and who's in the wrong? And sometimes I don't know. That's can be pretty ambiguous. And that's
well, those things would be for why does that person feel like they have to be with you? And that's something that's theirs, right? If you have if you communicated with that person that, hey, sorry, I'm not interested, and they're offended by that, that's not yours, right? Because you did your part and you communicated,
right?
And you let them know what happened and this is what's going on. Hey, I'm sorry, but I don't feel the same way. A, B, and C. I wish you well. And if that person is angry with you, there's something else going on that they have to manage and they have to deal with, and that's for them and not you to hold.
Right, and that's typically like loss, right? Because at that situation, I don't think it's really rejection or fear of rejection. I think it's loss of something they valued, right? Because they obviously valued something about you in order to be affected by that loss, right? Because if I'm going to move on to a different relationship, then that means that you're going to go through that period of loss, and there's not really anything you can do about it because my mind's made up on another person, right? So, yeah, man, I don't. I have
a few. Yeah. I have a last few questions that I ask every guest before the end. We are running short on time, so okay. I did want to ask you, what do you have going on currently that you'd like to promote, that you'd like people to follow you on?
Well, I started an apparel company called Breathe for Life Apparel. That was as soon as COVID kicked off, I'm like, dang, I know people are going to be struggling right now. They're going to go through loss again, like we talked about. Loss is a big thing, including that relationship we have with our job, our bank account, our finances. You know, that's not just in interpersonal. It's also with your personal and financial management skills, your laundry, whatever it might be. What kind of relationship do you have with doing the dishes, right?
Sure.
Like, so that's a relationship. So it kind of changed that, and it evolved into kind of what it is now, and that is Reflection Apparel Company. You know, and that's about kind of taking an intrinsic look at yourself and focusing on what you can change, because the only person I think you should be competing in life with is yourself, right? All the greats do that. You know, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, anyone in sports, they're not really out there competing against another team. They're out there in the gym seeing if they can do one more rep. They're on the field seeing if they can shave 1 second off of their time. Not if they can beat someone else. They're out there seeing every day if they can beat themselves. So,
and where can we find you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram. Now, I'm not going to have any apparel or merchandise available for quite some time, but I am doing a little video series called The Bookshelf, and it'll briefly touch on each of these topics. So in it, there's a metaphorical book and then a little object that kind of correlates to that book title. So it's not an actual literal published book. It's just a metaphorical, hey, this is a book, this is the title or the topic that we're going to be talking about. And real short, you know, it's kind of like I want it to be like almost like a Mr. Rogers type of thing, where I can kind of be a parent to maybe someone who needs a parent or doesn't have a parent, you know, like the Marine Corps. You just kind of assume that role. And then, the whole design of all the apparel is that the writing on the shirt is backwards, so that way it's meant for the wearer, the person wearing the merchandise, so that way when they're looking in the mirror, they can read the words on their own shirt. So I think it's pretty cool. And there's been some like little, I don't know, almost like these Easter eggs that have been popping out at me that have shown up in the evolution of this apparel company. So it's at, you can find us on Instagram at reflectionapparel_CO.
Okay. And have you discovered purpose? And if not, what do you think it might be?
Have I discovered my personal purpose in life? You know, I think I had ideas for myself. And I think we can get discouraged or disappointed when those ideas that we have for ourselves don't pan out the way that we expected them to, or kind of visualize them as. But I think that, you know, my purpose is just to go forth and kind of be a coach and a mentor to people, and you know.
Good. Yeah. If you could speak to your childhood self, what would you say?
I don't know. I guess I'd say you're going to do great, kid.
Sometimes all you need is words of encouragement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, positive reinforcement is huge. Yeah, so I guess I would say that's probably my purpose. Try to go forth in life and do give people positive reinforcement for good things, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on. Really appreciate all the time that you spent. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate your advice, and I appreciate your friendship. So I hope to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lopez.
Yeah.